They said inheritance brings families together. That night it carved our names into separate lines. The silver gleamed too brightly as if it had been polished just to blind me. Chandeliers scattered fractured light across the mahogany table where plates rested in perfect order, each one more ceremonial than hospitable. I had sat at that table countless times as a child, back when my laugh hadn't yet been trained into silence. Yet tonight felt like an execution cloaked as a celebration. Patricia Mercer, my stepmother, elegant in her emerald silk, lifted her crystal glass with the steady confidence of a woman used to orchestrating rooms. To Jonathan, she said, voice smooth, rehearsed. The future of the Mercer family, the son who will carry our name into the world with pride and honor. Her words floated delicate as perfume, but they landed with the weight of law. Jonathan leaned back in his chair, basking. His cufflinks engraved with the Mercer crest caught the light as if they had been waiting for this performance. His smile was precise, almost cruel in its perfection. "Thank you, Mother," he said, brushing his thumb along the rim of the glass, savoring the applause. Even Stephen, my younger brother, nodded faintly. I alone sat still. I had returned after years away after leaving the family business in bitter silence, hoping perhaps there would be some acknowledgement of my effort, my endurance. But Patricia's toast left no room for me. I felt my presence shrink against the portraits looming from the walls, ancestors painted in military regalia, eyes locked in judgment. Each one seemed to ask why I had not fought harder for my place. Jonathan rose, his voice filling the room like a sermon. "It is official," he declared. "I have been named the next leader of Mercer Industries." The words cut through me, cold and clinical. I searched the table for recognition, but none came. Instead, Jonathan's gaze lingered on me, sharp with condescension. "Caroline," he added with the kind of smile meant for audiences. "You always did have a knack for keeping the books. But leadership requires more than quiet calculations, don't you agree?" The guests chuckled politely, and I felt their laughter gnaw at the edges of my composure. Patricia's eyes flicked toward me, but there was no softness in them. Only a warning: stay silent, stay small. Stephen kept his head lowered, his fork moving slowly, rhythmically. He never once met my gaze. His silence unsettled me more than Jonathan's cruelty, because silence in this family was never neutral. I shifted in my chair, forcing my breath to steady. Beyond Patricia, I noticed a locked cabinet nestled against the far wall. Its brass handle gleamed, untouched, conspicuous. Something about its secrecy pulled at me, a shadow in the room that did not belong to the performance unfolding at the table. Jonathan raised his glass higher, ensuring all eyes turned to him, to the Mercer name carried by those who deserve it. His words did not merely exclude me, they erased me deliberately, surgically. The air thickened, the clink of glasses sealing my absence. I gripped my fork so tightly the metal dug into my palm. My lips moved, barely parting a vow spoken only to myself. If I don't fight back now, I'll vanish forever. They smiled across polished crystal, but I heard the cracks in every word. The parlor had changed costumes, but not intent. Dinner's rigid theater gave way to velvet chairs and the faint musk of brandy. Firelight coaxed warmth across the room, yet the glow felt staged, as though curated by Patricia herself. She moved between trays and porcelain with rehearsed ease, pouring tea into cups. No one requested smoothing image, smoothing silence. Jonathan claimed the hearth as if he had purchased the fire outright. "Boston's practically done," he said, his voice the script of a conqueror. He turned the brandy glass into a spotlight. "Permits secured by the end of the quarter, then the harbor expansion. After that, the resort. Clean capital, clean exit. Velocity, that's what we've lacked." The word settled heavy, as though velocity had ever been a virtue in itself. Stephen kept his posture folded small on the edge of a chair near the window. His reflection in the glass seemed more solid than his body, a man rehearsing retreat. Patricia seated herself opposite me, sliding a cup across the table. "You must be relieved, dear," she said softly, "to have clarity at last. Your portion provides comfort. Responsibility." Her glance kissed Jonathan rests where it belongs. I placed my fingertips on the porcelain rim. The steam blurred my vision, but not the insult. "Structure does matter," I said, letting my words rest on the tablecloth. "It keeps stories from falling apart." Jonathan laughed. "Stories. Caroline. This is no play. It's an orderly transition. Father understood scale. He passed it to the child strong enough to carry it." The cabinet behind Patricia drew my gaze. Brass keyhole gleamed in the light, a smudge of wear underneath like a thumb pressed there too often. Patricia's bracelets chimed faintly metal on metal when she shifted her wrist. "What's the Boston close date again?" I asked, tone light. "Permits by the quarter's end, you meant December earlier," Jonathan said. We briefed the lender. "Greystone." His eyes flickered. "Cromwell." "Curious," I said. "Cromwell doesn't fund in December. Their underwriting pauses until January. At least it did when I kept the books." Patricia's smile cracked before reassembling. "Caroline, darling, you've been gone for years. Things change. Faster than calendars." My tea cooled, untouched. Jonathan forced a laugh. "We have options, mezzanine if we must. A bridge facility on offer." "From Cromwell," I murmured. His jaw locked. Stephen's stillness deepened the silence of a man unwilling to inherit a battlefield. Patricia's voice intervened, smooth as satin drawn over splinters. "This isn't an audit. Let your brother celebrate. Be grateful with your share." Grateful. The word perched awkwardly on the mantel, waiting for approval. "I am," I said. "For clarity. For dates that stand when light hits them." Jonathan leaned forward until the fire haloed his shoulders. "Some of us were born to carry weight. Others, well, you kept the books, remember." The sentence sliced more cleanly than any toast. Heat rose in my chest, but I let the portraits of ancestors absorb it. Patricia exhaled, satisfied. Stephen stared at the window where his reflection betrayed unease he would not voice. "I think, if he lies so easily here, what else has he forged?" Jonathan lifted his glass again. "Once the press release lands, the noise fades. People love a decisive narrative. People do. Papers do. But numbers do not. They wait quiet, exact, patient as a keyhole in brass. They thought the estate library held only dust. It held my father's voice. The house had retired into silence, the kind that hummed faintly through corridors like a warning. Brandy glasses were rinsed chairs aligned, and yet my pulse refused rest. I carried the echo of Jonathan's smirk into the dark, that careless dismissal which clung to me like smoke. Upstairs, Patricia's heels had tapped a retreat. Stephen had vanished into his room, but something unresolved kept me awake. My eyes returned to the thought of the cabinet, its brass keyhole glinting, and I felt pulled elsewhere. The library door groaned as I pressed against it. A draft slipped through, stale with old paper and polish. Shelves climbed skyward, regimented spines under watchful portraits. Moonlight cut narrow ladders across the rug, silver bars that caged the room in fragile light. My footsteps softened against the carpet, each one a negotiation with silence. I remembered afternoons long ago when my father corrected my sums at this very table. His hand had pressed firm on the page, guiding numbers into neat lines, whispering that truth always survived ink. Tonight the air felt heavier, as if he had left behind not just memory, but instruction. I traced the titles along one shelf, fingertips brushing leather bindings, listening for any unevenness. Near the end, a volume leaned fractionally, a soldier out of step. Its spine was worn where others gleamed, as though summoned more often than read. I tugged. The book yielded reluctantly, revealing not a hollow panel but a narrow slit, a wedge that released a folded envelope. My chest tightened. The script across it was not generic, not forged, not copied. It was his. My father's handwriting, decisive, slanted, unmistakable. I stared at it too long, as though the ink itself might fade if I blinked. My thumb slid under the seal paper, brittle but loyal, inside a single page folded twice. The scent of cedar clung faintly, the kind his study always carried. I unfolded the sheet, hands unsteady. Words bloomed in the pale light. Justice delayed is not justice denied. Keep the record straight. I read it twice, then again, each syllable striking deeper. He had known. He had anticipated shadows gathering even before his death. The line was not advice, it was a charge. A father speaking beyond silence, instructing me to hold line against distortion. I felt the ground shift, a new axis forming where resignation had sat. I pressed the page to my chest, breath caught. Betrayal no longer lived in Jonathan's smirk or Patricia's polite cruelty. It lived in ink. It lived in the recognition that my father foresaw deception, and that he had left me not wealth, not ceremony, but this, a compass carved in words. Carefully, I slipped the letter into my notebook, tucking it beneath harmless lines of calculations. Numbers would shield it until I understood its full weight. The envelope crackled once, then disappeared under the cover. Moonlight edged higher across the shelves. I imagined my father seated in the old armchair, patient, watchful. His absence felt less empty tonight. His voice lingered in the phrase, demanding courage, demanding fidelity to the truth. For the first time since dinner, my spine straightened, not in defense, but in resolve. I turned once, scanning the rows of books, each now a possible accomplice hiding fragments of him. The hush of the library embraced me, heavier than any applause Jonathan might ever command, and in that quiet duty anchored itself irreversible. I whispered to the empty shelves, "You left me a weapon, didn't you, Father?" In the glass tower downtown, they tried to bury me with signatures. The elevator climbed in silence, numbers ticking upward like a slow verdict. My reflection in the steel doors looked calmer than I felt. At my side, my bag held my notebook, the one with Father's letter hidden between columns of figures. Keep the record straight. His words beat steadier than my pulse. If documents were their weapon, I had inherited a different blade. The boardroom stretched across the top-floor glass walls opening to the Richmond skyline. Jonathan stood at the head of the long table, jacket, open charm, rehearsed. Patricia was already seated, pearls arranged, posture flawless. Two lawyers shuffled neat stacks of contracts, their pens aligned as though order itself could compel consent. Jonathan gestured. Just clarifications. Nothing new. Patricia's voice followed, soft but pointed. It's best for the family, Caroline. Sign and we all move forward. I pulled the folder toward me. My name stared back in heavy ink, familiar strokes, yet not mine. Too stiff where I curved, too uniform where my hand faltered. A flourish I abandoned years ago reappeared like a ghost. I don't write like this anymore, I said. Jonathan's smile was precise. Stress affects handwriting. Memory can deceive. But dates don't, I replied, tapping the page. This notary stamp belongs to someone who left the state last spring, and this witness was in Denver during your claimed signing. The younger lawyer cleared his throat. Technicalities. These ratify what already exists. Perfection is what liars call forgery. I turned another page. Buried in the clause's waiver of board votes in perpetuity. A tidy eternity. Patricia leaned forward, bracelets chiming. Sacrifice is expected. Families survive by unity. Unity doesn't mean silence, I said. Jonathan braced his palms on the table. You left once. The company cannot indulge hesitation again. I didn't leave, I said. I served. There's a difference. His eyes narrowed. Then serve us now. Protect what Father built. I lifted the paper to the window. Sunlight revealed the treachery. My signature ink gleamed differently than the text. Whoever had forged me changed pens too late. I'll need originals. Notary logs. Chain of custody. Patricia's smile cracked. Pedantry doesn't become you. It's not pedantry. It's proof. The lawyer slid a pen toward me. We can walk you through each clause. I pushed it back with 2 fingers. I'll walk myself. Jonathan leaned closer, lowering his voice as though intimacy could smother doubt. You can either sign now or be erased later. The words hung heavier than glass. I felt my father's letter press against me from the notebook like a pulse through paper. Justice delayed is not justice denied. I stood. I don't vanish. I document. I left the folder on the polished table, its ink trembling in sunlight. The lawyers watched in rigid silence. Patricia's pearls no longer glowed but strangled. Jonathan remained still, smile-frozen eyes burning with the kind of certainty men hold when they believe no one can unmask them. The hallway outside felt wider than the room. Framed deals lined the walls, triumphs of past decades. I walked past them one by one, a silent ledger of every precedent. They thought my signature was a weapon they could steal. But if it could be forged once, it could be unmasked twice. Silence can shield, or it can betray. His silence cut deeper than their words. The garden was almost bare, the roses pruned back to thorn and memory. Wind moved through the branches, scattering brittle leaves across the stone path. I had always preferred this place as a child, before boardrooms and signatures and voices polished to sound like knives. Now dusk washed the Mercer grounds in a fading gold, fragile as promises already broken. Stephen was there before me, sitting on the wrought iron bench, shoulders hunched, suit jacket too thin for the chill. He wasn't drinking or smoking, just staring at the fountain that no longer flowed. For a moment I thought he wouldn't acknowledge me at all. I stopped a few feet away. Did you know about Jonathan's papers? He stiffened as though the air itself had caught him. His eyes darted toward the house, then back at the ground. I saw things, he muttered. Nothing more. Saw things? My voice cracked sharper than I intended. Stephen, those signatures could erase me. He rubbed his palms together, not from cold, but from nerves. It's not simple. Then make it simple. The silence after my demand stretched. I could almost hear the rustle of the pages. Jonathan had flaunted the ink glinting in false authority. My father's letter pulsed against my notebook in my pocket, urging me forward. Stephen finally looked at me. His eyes weren't Jonathan's steel or Patricia's polished glass. They were weary, clouded, yet not empty. You think he doesn't plan every move? He's been preparing this for months. Years, maybe. Then you knew. I pressed. He flinched at the word. I noticed things. Irregular filings, inconsistencies. But saying it aloud, he cut himself off. Gaze snapping back to the house again. Words can't be taken back in this family. That's why I asked about silence. I said quietly. Because sometimes silence helps them more than their lies. For the first time, I saw something in him crack. A tiny shift like ice giving way under weight. He opened his mouth, then shut it, fists clenched in his lap. When he spoke again, his voice was lower, almost swallowed by the dusk. Check the numbers in October filings. I froze. What? That's all I can say. He stood straightening his jacket as if that gesture could armor him. If you keep digging, Caroline, don't expect anyone to pull you out. I stepped forward. Stephen. But he was already walking, shoes crunching over leaves. His back was rigid, but his pace too quick to be casual. He didn't look back. I sank onto the bench he had left, warm, staring at the fountain's empty basin. October filings. The phrase circled like a key with no lock. The month my father's health had collapsed. The month Jonathan had traveled supposedly for negotiations. The month I had received nothing but Patricia's perfumed letters of dismissal. Stephen's silence wasn't loyalty but fear. And fear, when bent, could still point to truth. I drew my notebook from my bag. Between margins of numbers, I wrote in small, deliberate strokes, October filings, marked, start. My breath fogged over the page, each exhale a fragile mark of resolve. Father's handwriting lived on one envelope, mine on this page. His command, keep the record straight, felt closer now. I closed the notebook, fingers trembling not from cold, but from recognition. Hope, faint and fragile, had just cracked through the soil of betrayal. Stephen's silence was jagged, but it had cut in my direction for once. I close my notebook, breath unsteady. If October hides my truth, I'll find it even if it buries him. They thought numbers were silent. I learned they scream when you read them right. The badge reader chirped. I signed the log as routine audit and followed the fluorescence into the records room. Paper dried the air, a ladder waited. Ledgers dozed in ranks, heavy-backed. A junior clerk hovered, badge crooked. We weren't told anyone was coming. Compliance wants a spot check, I said. October through year-end. October. She fetched keys, opened a drawer, slid binders toward me, then retreated to a stool, pretending to email. I started with bank recs, letting the rhythm of columns quiet the noise. Numbers behave when you let them tell the story. Debits matched credits until they didn't. A Tuesday wore a Sunday date. A vendor ID repeated where policy forbids duplication. A wire notation carried an extra space before the colon. Not my habit, not anyone I trained. Underlying transfer sheets, I asked. She handed over a slim stack. Sign out if you remove anything. I won't, I said. Evidence likes the room it's born in. Handwriting can be mimicked. Movement cannot. I searched for the places a forger's hand forgets to breathe strokes, refusing to tire where mine always did. One authorization climbed the line too cheerfully. Another lacked the mercy curve on the tail of my E. Someone had practiced me until practice felt like ownership. A ledger page snagged my fingertip. Imprinted. I angled it to the light and raked my phone's beam low. There, faint as a confession under a door, the ghost of figures written on a sheet that no longer lived here. Pressure bit down and left its bone, 6 digits the middle pair crossed, rewritten darker. Tampering rarely erases its echo. The clerk shifted. Everything okay? Just dusty, I said. October's binder waited tidy for the season. On the third divider, a clipped packet authorization remittance confirmation. A transfer from a sweep account I knew to a holding company I'd never met. The amount rested with the serenity of a stone. My name curled at the bottom like a blessing I hadn't given. I hovered a finger above the ink, feeling for ridge where pressure gathers. My hand leaves a scar in the middle of the our-old fracture. This signature was smooth as glass. Even pressure. No fatigue. The date, October 3rd, stared back like a locked door. Need copies? The clerk asked, tone too bright. Only summaries, I said. I'll photograph the rest in place for chain integrity. Relief slackened her shoulders. I set my notebook on the table, opened it to a page that meant nothing, and angled my phone discreetly. Authorization front and back. The indentation proving a predecessor existed, then didn't. The index tab misaligned by a millimeter, a human error. The eye forgives, and a camera does not. My pulse steadied, not calmer, truer. I wrote down the wire reference, the approving initials that weren't mine, the notary stamp that belonged to nobody on the state register. The buzz of the lights blended with the blood in my ears. Everything you need, she tried again. For now, I said. I restored each packet to its exact place. Squared corners, slid binders home, left dust lines undisturbed. The last thing you do with a live wire is wave it. At the sign-out sheet, I wrote nothing. I had removed nothing. But in my pocket, the camera held a chorus I could finally hear. October 3rd. My name I did not write. A path pointing outward toward whoever thought a ledger was a good place to bury a crime. The badge chirped once more. The corridor returned my steps. Numbers are honest when someone listens. If they stole my name on paper, they underestimated how loud I could make it speak. Sometimes the smallest spark is enough to set fear ablaze. The Richmond ballroom smelled of polished wood and practiced laughter. Strings murmured. Waiters orbited with trays like obedient moons. Patricia chose mirrors to multiply applause chandeliers to crown certainty. Jonathan stood beneath one as if it haloed only him. I moved through clusters never long enough to be catalogued long enough to leave a suggestion. Odd quarter, wasn't it? I said to two minor shareholders. I stumbled over a few discrepancies, tidying old ledgers, probably nothing a notary stamp out of state. A date that forgot which day of the week it was. Their brows knit. I drifted before the follow-ups found my name. Across the room, Patricia tracked me with her pearls, placing canapes where curiosity gathered, and dissolving talk with sugared efficiency. Another circle, another nudge. Have you ever seen Cromwell Fund in December? I asked a man whose tie knew more about sailboats than balance sheets. I must be remembering wrong. He shrugged, then didn't. Jonathan raised a hand. The quartet hushed. Friends, he said, Mercer is poised for velocity. Permits in motion partnerships aligned, leadership united. The last word looked at me and pretended it hadn't. Polite applause rolled. I edged toward a knot of investors. Curious thing about October, I murmured, as if recalling a grocery item. Some transfers looked overdressed. I sipped and made room for the idea to breathe. Questions budded. Jonathan, the harbor timeline financing Cromwell or Greystone. Another voice registrar lists your notary in North Carolina last spring. Replacement on file. Jonathan's smile held, but his eyes flared, quick, hot, gone. He answered with polish. Cromwell is one of several partners. The calendar is flexible. We're exploring structures to optimize seasonality. Documentation is impeccable. Rumors stem from misinterpretations. The words flowed without touching anything. Patricia arrived with a laugh like a curtain. Before we drown the night in paperwork, she trilled, let's toast the scholarships Mercer funds this year. Glasses rose, yet investors did not step away. They hovered, wanting assurances they hadn't needed yesterday. I let the toast end and slipped into the eddy at Jonathan's flank. Numbers don't lie, Jonathan. People do. I didn't pitch it as a threat, only as the kindness a ledger offers before the audit arrives. For a heartbeat, the room forgot its script. Jonathan's jaw clicked once, small, invisible, but the motion traveled down the line of shareholders like a shiver. He pivoted, pupils narrowing, then widened them back to charm. Caroline cares about precision, he said. It's a family trait. Then you'll love December, I said lightly. A man to my left coughed into a napkin. Someone asked about bridge facilities. Someone else muttered about registrar logs. Patricia applauded, strings louder than the music required. Jonathan spoke faster now, half a step ahead of his breath. He pivoted to community impact and legacy. Yet the room had learned a new word, and it was shadow. Certainty dulled by a few degrees, the way a mirror fogs when cold air slips under a door. I didn't push. Sparks are not bonfires. They select their fuel. I thanked a donor for supporting veterans' housing, asked a retiree about her granddaughter's ceramics. Restraint worked harder than any speech. At the coat check, I passed the bar where Jonathan was cornered by three quiet men who never wasted a question. Patricia drifted toward them. Their heads drew together. The chandelier above trembled. For the first time, I saw him blink. That blink was my victory. They built a cage of contracts for me. I learned cages can also trap their makers. The conference room kept its own winter. Light slid along a polished table. Binders waited in neat stacks. Jonathan stood to stage the frame. Patricia sat poised. The family attorney opened a folder. Thank you for coming, he said. We're ready to finalize the inheritance instruments, largely memorial. Clarifying understandings, perfecting the record. If it's memorial, I asked, taking the chair that saw both door and window. Why does it need my pulse? Markets prefer clean process, Jonathan said. It's best for the family, Patricia added. The attorney slid the first packet toward me. Acknowledgement of prior consents. Waivers as previously executed. Confirmation of governance. I turned pages. The clauses wore simple close and sharp teeth. Between warranties and definitions lay the machine irrevocable waiver of board votes. Authority demoted to courtesy. A signature line presuming history had already agreed. I'm not signing away a voice I still use. It's already waived, Jonathan replied. This merely records it. Then the record won't mind a review, I said. We'll start with October. Patricia's smile twitched. Darling, you make work from goodwill. Accuracy is goodwill, I said. Continuity depends on clarity, the attorney offered. Clarity depends on dates that existed. I lifted a page. Ink gleamed where age should have dulled it. Who notarized these consents I supposedly gave? He named someone who had been out of state the week those seals landed. His pen quit tapping. Jonathan leaned in. You left the company. This prevents confusion. You have your share. Let structure do its job. I know structure, I said. It's math with better stationery. You're stalling. I'm reading. In the margin, an extra space split words that never needed breathing room. Provide originals, notary logs, witness calendars, chain of custody, and ledger impressions. Ledger impressions, the lawyer repeated. Paper remembers pressure, I said. Patricia's bracelets chimed. Are you accusing your brother? I'm describing a process. One he should welcome if the record is clean. We're hours from releasing our timeline, Jonathan said. Investors expect one voice. Then they don't need mine, I said, sliding the packet back 2 inches. He pushed it forward the same distance. Sign Caroline. No more noise. Noise is what you call questions you don't like. The attorney softened. We can tailor language preserving your dignitary interests while extinguishing residual governance rights. You'll be insulated from reputational risk should strategy evolve. Insulated, I said. From my own name, practicality, protecting you. Silence packaged as safety. Refusal complicates matters, Jonathan said. We can proceed without you. You can try. The lawyer reopened the folder. A brief execution clears the path. No substantive change, merely memorialization. Then it can wait for verification. I stacked the pages, aligning corners. If these papers are valid, you shouldn't fear my review. Patricia rose halfway, then settled. Jonathan palmed his pen, set it down, palmed it again. I stood, shouldered my bag, left the packet where power wanted it. The door breathed. The corridor exhaled cold. At the hall's end, traffic braided into dusk. In the elevator's mirrored hush, I saw a woman who still had a voice and a ledger that remembered. Paper imagines it can keep you. It forgets that rings open, that light unmasks ink, that pressure confesses. They thought I was cornered. They forgot corners also sharpen blades. If you felt the blade turn in this chapter, subscribe now, because the next move will cut even deeper. They came for everything at once, as if stripping me bare would end the fight. The storm outside was relentless, hurling rain against the glass panes of my Richmond apartment as though the sky itself had chosen sides. Inside, silence weighed heavier than the thunder. A sharp knock broke it, 3 raps, decisive and cold. When I opened the door, a court official stood there, rain dripping from his coat, eyes flat with routine indifference. He handed me a thick envelope sealed and stamped with authority. Notice of seizure, he muttered. His voice carried no sympathy, just the finality of duty. Assets frozen, effective immediately. Vehicle repossession scheduled for tomorrow. Accounts under court hold. He didn't linger. He didn't need to. His departure left the echo of bureaucracy hanging in the air like smoke. I stood frozen, staring at the papers as water slid from the envelope onto the hardwood floor. Numbers, codes, and clauses blurred together, but the message was clear. Jonathan had moved faster, harder, crushing me not with words, but with influence. Every lifeline cut. I moved through the apartment once filled with carefully chosen pieces of independence, now reduced to shadows of ownership. The framed photographs came down tucked hastily into a duffel bag. A few clothes, my father's letter hidden deep inside a notebook, a handful of essentials. This was what survival looked like when your name had been turned against you. The knock came again, softer this time. I opened the door to find Stephen standing there, his collar damp, his eyes restless. He didn't step inside immediately, as though the threshold itself accused him. "You knew," I said, my voice lower than I intended. It wasn't an accusation. It was truth that hung between us. He glanced away, shoulders folding inward. "I warned you," he admitted, almost whispering, but I couldn't stop him. The words carried no comfort. They only underlined the truth. He had chosen silence when it mattered most. His presence filled the room with unease and apology wrapped in cowardice. For a moment, I wanted to scream, to demand more than fragments of loyalty. Instead, I stayed still, my hands clenched on the duffel strap. Stephen lingered as if torn between guilt and fear, then turned for the door. He left me with nothing but the echo of footsteps down the hall. The rain swallowed him whole. When the lock clicked shut behind him, my chest tightened. For the first time, I let myself sink into the emptiness. I slid to the floor, back against the wall, the cold creeping in through the draft. My eyes landed on the notebook, my father's letter inside. The ink of his handwriting burned in my memory. "Justice delayed is not justice denied. Keep the record straight." I whispered into the hollow space of the apartment, each word trembling yet fierce. "You buried me too early." Silence answered, until another knock, not heavy like the court officer, not hesitant like Stephen. Just one measured tap. I rose, every nerve tense, and opened the door to find a courier, his cap low against the storm. Without a word, he handed me a small padded envelope, signed the slip, and left into the night. I tore it open. Inside lay a plain black USB drive, anonymous, weightless, yet electric in my palm. A flash of plastic and steel, small enough to fit in my palm, heavy enough to tilt the war. I kept the drive in my pocket until the rain polished the streets into mirrors. The cafe on Ninth hid behind fogged glass, a small sanctuary where steam disguised breath and talk dissolved into hiss. Rachel slid into the corner booth, hoodie under a blazer, the look she wore when code and consequences shared a table. "You said urgent?" she murmured. I set the USB on a napkin. No networks, no trails. She produced a scarred, air-gapped laptop. No radios, no history. The screen rose like a curtain. "Last chance to not know." "I already know," I said. "I need proof that behaves." The file tree opened folders meant to be boring, INV, OPS, AGMT. Inside, OPS email threads marched in tidy tyranny. Jonathan crisp, even in plain text, adjust the ledger for optics. Advance the disbursement, will backfill signatures. Use Cromwell in press notes regardless of sequence. Rachel's mouth tightened. "Your brother writes like a courthouse. Keep going." She drilled into attachments. Scans bloomed, grayscale ghosts stamped and initialed. On one, my signature haloed faintly, pixels fraying where a lift and drop failed to hide seams. On another, a notary seal leaned 1 degree off true. "Dates?" I asked. "October 3rd, she said, tapping metadata. Her cursor hovered over a folder named Board Prep. First line, Stephen, initial the October sweep. His reply, "I'll review." Jonathan, no time. Initial and move. The booth narrowed. He knew. "Or someone wrote his credentials," Rachel said. "Headers route through his block." She opened another scan. It took a heartbeat to render, as if memory resisted exposure. My father's signature stared back, square, decisive, the tail of the R bitten down where patience always snapped. The notary timestamp disagreed with the file's clock by a day. A seam in a suit pretending to be bespoke. Rachel leaned away from the glow. "This is dynamite. Use it right, or it blows back. How loud, company-wide, if you pull the wrong wire. Quiet if you cut where the current hides provenance, chain of custody, a judge who hates theater." I pressed my palms to the table. Outside, a bus sighed like an exhausted witness. Inside, the wand screamed and then forgave. I could hear Jonathan's future press lines, Patricia's finishing school calm, Stephen folding himself small. Great lies steal signatures. Make me 2 copies, I said. One dark. One locked where panic won't look. She nodded. And the original goes where it can't be argued away. Rachel ejected the drive, palmed it as if it might bolt. We split contents to 2 encrypted sticks, wrote checksums by hand, compared them like mirrors. She sealed each in a plain envelope with tape that would scream if peeled. No names on paper, handles get grabbed. She scrolled once more. There's a script for investor Q&A, she said. Sister stepped back voluntarily. Seasonal financing cadence. Documentation routine. They wrote a stage and called it reality, I said. Reality's petty, she said. It keeps receipts. We sat with the hum for a beat that took its time. I slid one copy under my coat, another into my bag. The original went back into its sleeve, the shape of a small future pressing against the fabric. Caroline Rachel said softer, if Stephen sent this fear can be a courier, I said. And remorse travels late. You prefer evidence punctual. I prefer it admissible. We paid in cash and left the cups half full, the way people do when they arrive on answer and don't need the rest of the scene. At the door, the bell tried to make us delicate. Outside, the storm had thinned to a patient drizzle. I felt taller than my shadow. Plan, preserve, verify, strike. Soon. Now. With this drive, I could burn them all. But timing was everything, and time was running out. They dressed the courtroom in silence. I brought fire hidden in my pocket. The Richmond courthouse smelled of polish and paper, as if history itself had been swept into tidy rows. Morning light slanted through tall windows, striking the oak benches where reporters hunched with pens and quiet hunger. Their murmurs faded when the bailiff announced our case. My heels clicked against marble as I followed Diana Collins to the defense table, the sound sharp enough to feel like punctuation. Jonathan already sat across from me, his suit flawless, his cufflinks winking with a confidence rehearsed too many times. Patricia perched beside him, elegance practiced lips curved into a smile brittle as glass. Case of Mercer Holdings versus Caroline Mercer, the clerk read. Petition to finalize board removal. Jonathan rose, his voice smooth thick with performance. Your Honor, my sister chose long ago to step away from the company. Today, we simply recognize what is already true. Mercer Holdings cannot afford to be slowed by her inexperience. We move to ratify her removal. Patricia tilted her head with the grace of a woman who always thought cameras were watching. The judge, Walter Briggs, a man known for his patience, gave a slight nod. His gavel rested quiet, but his eyes cut through everything. Diana leaned toward me. Steady, she whispered. We're not here to win in one blow. We're here to open the wound. When she rose, her tone was plain surgical. Your Honor, the petition relies on documents that cannot withstand scrutiny. We ask this court to admit into record new evidence that bears directly on the authenticity of those documents. A ripple passed through the reporters. Jonathan's smile didn't falter, but his fingers tapped once against the table, an old tell from childhood chess matches. Patricia's hand covered his as if hiding the noise might erase the crack. Diana lifted a small envelope. Inside was the copy Rachel had prepared, the evidence made clean and sharp. She approached the bench, offering the USB sealed in its protective sleeve. Contained here are email exchanges, internal directives, and contract scans that indicate deliberate forgery of financial records, including falsification of my client's consent. Judge Briggs motioned to the bailiff, who carried it to the clerk. A technician rolled in a neutral-use laptop. The air shifted, no longer formal, but expectant. The first file appeared, Jonathan's email. Adjust the ledger for optics. Use Cromwell in press notes regardless of sequence. The words glowed on the screen, damning in their banality. A second file followed, contracts bearing my lifted signature, metadata traced to October 3rd. Reporters leaned forward, pens scratching like rain. Jonathan stood abruptly. This is fabricated. An insult to this court. His voice cracked the silence but not the weight in the room. Patricia tugged lightly at his sleeve, a reminder that fury never photographs well. Judge Briggs lifted his gaze heavy and measured. "Mr. Mercer, you will restrain yourself. These documents warrant forensic review. Until then, no petition will be finalized." It was the first tremor in his fortress. The courtroom watched him, not me. And he knew it. I rose slowly, smoothing my skirt as if unhurried. My voice carried without strain. "Your Honor, if my brother insists this is fabricated, he won't object when I call the original witness who delivered it." For a breath, no one moved. Jonathan's mask faltered, his jaw tightening. Reporters froze, mid-scribble, heads snapping toward me. Patricia whispered something sharp under her breath, her smile finally collapsing. The back doors creaked open. Shoes struck marble. Every gaze turned. Stephen Mercer stepped inside. He wasn't polished. He wasn't rehearsed. His silence had been his shield for months, but today, it was the prelude to something else. The courtroom gasped. Jonathan's eyes widened, not in rage but in recognition of a tide turning. And in that suspended moment, fire filled the silence I had carried in my pocket. They taught me family was unbreakable. That day, family broke under oath. Afternoon light flattened the courtroom into plains of oak and glass. The bailiff called us back to order. The hum of reporters reset to a cautious murmur. Stephen stood at the witness stand, right hand raised. He looked smaller there, not because the room was large, but because truth had a way of taking inches from anyone who hoarded it too long. "Do you swear?" the clerk intoned. He did. The oath settled on his shoulders like a coat he hadn't worn in years. Diana rose, first voice even. "State your name and role with Mercer Holdings." "Stephen Mercer," he said. "Operations oversight, approvals vendor pipeline, internal reviews, and your access to October financials." He swallowed, full. "Tell the court why the emails and scans we saw this morning exist." A pause. His eyes went to Jonathan, then to Patricia, then down. "Because Jonathan told me to move funds that weren't approved," he said. He said, "Initial the sweep, and to fix optics in the ledger." I objected. He told me there wasn't time. He drew a slow breath. He said to make it look signed. "Signed by whom, Caroline?" he said. "And sometimes Patricia." A rustle crossed the benches. Diana let it pass. "Did you see Caroline sign anything authorizing those transfers?" "No." "Were you pressured to initial anyway?" He looked at his hands. "Yes." "By whom, Jonathan?" Diana returned to counsel table as Mercer's attorney stood, the smile of someone who believed rhythm could outplay content. "Mr. Mercer, you dislike your brother's leadership, don't you?" Stephen's mouth twitched. "I dislike being told to lie. You could have refused." "He said refusing was disloyalty," Stephen answered. "He said he'd strip my title and cut me off. He said the family needed unity. And yet, you copied files." "Yes. For leverage, for proof. You routed those copies through your credentials. If someone else used your access, you can't be sure it was Jonathan. Can you?" Stephen lifted his eyes, and for once they were steady. He gave the orders in person. The attorney sat unsettled. Judge Briggs turned to the screen as Diana cued another exhibit. The forged clauses filled the display, inheritance language with an extra sentence, irrevocable waiver, permanent silence. The signature line wore Patricia's name. The notary seal sat in the wrong corner. Diana addressed her. "Mrs. Mercer, would you look at Plaintiff's Exhibit 24? Patricia lifted the paper as if heat might live in it. "Yes." "My signature." "Did you sign this version?" Her lashes fluttered. "I signed. A standard memorial. The extra clause, did you approve it?" Patricia's mouth opened, then closed. Her eyes slid to Jonathan. None arrived. "I signed what was placed before me," she said. "I was told it was routine." "By whom, Jonathan?" Did you read it? She stopped. The room leaned. I didn't see that clause. Not in the version I signed. The admission landed like a dropped gavel. Reporters stopped pretending to be furniture. Jonathan's mask fissured. So the document bearing your name with that clause is not what you recall signing. Patricia's knuckles whitened. It appears altered. Jonathan stood so abruptly his chair scraped. She's lying, he snapped, color rising. She knew everything. She pushed it. Patricia flinched. You told me it was a memorial. You said if I asked questions, you'd cut my stipend and tell the press I'd misused charity funds. The words tore free. The room gasped. He rounded on her. You were complicit all along. I was cornered. She shot back, voice breaking. You threatened me. You threatened Stephen. You waved father's name like a weapon. The judge leaned forward. Mr. Mercer, Mrs. Mercer. Jonathan ignored him, eyes blazing. This is theater. She's orchestrated. I didn't rise. I didn't speak. I watched the hinge where loyalty rusted. Stephen stared at his hands again, gripping a ledge only he could feel. Judge Briggs banged the gavel. Order, or I hold you in contempt. Reporters surged for the exits, hungry to broadcast scandal. Power crumbles loudest when those who fed on it scatter first. 3 days after the courtroom eruption, the atmosphere at Mercer Holdings was suffocating, as if the walls themselves braced for collapse. The boardroom, once polished into a cathedral of Jonathan's dominance, looked stripped bare. Newspapers lay scattered across mahogany, their headlines, "Merciless Mercer Fraud, Scandal Deepens." The glass walls no longer reflected power but uncertainty, each director avoiding the other's gaze. I entered quietly, not summoned, but not refused. My heels clicked against marble that once amplified Jonathan's voice. Now it carried only silence. Jonathan stood already at the table, pacing like a predator cornered. His suit was creased, his tie, crooked eyes sunken from sleepless nights. The chairman cleared his throat. This is an emergency session. Shareholders demand answers. A director brandished the morning edition. Your credibility has vanished, Jonathan. If you remain, the company will sink with you. Jonathan slammed his hand on the table. Lies. Fabrications by a bitter sister desperate for recognition. His glance cut toward me, venom masked as charm. Not lies, I answered. From my folder, I slid the notarized copy of our father's original signature preserved within the USB files. Its ink glowed under fluorescent lights heavier than any argument. The paper traveled hand to hand, whispers rising like embers. The chairman's voice dropped. Authentic. Unaltered. His gaze locked on Jonathan. And the contracts you filed contradict this. Jonathan's composure cracked. Technicalities? You think a scrap of paper erases 20 years of leadership? I am Mercer Holdings. Were corrected another board member. Past tense. At the far end, Patricia sat, rigid hands clasped. Jonathan leaned toward her, tone softening into plea. Tell them, Patricia. Family first. Say you stand with me. Her reply was quiet but final. Family is not fraud. I will not follow you into ruin. The silence that followed was verdict enough. The chairman raised his hand. Motion to remove Jonathan Mercer as Chief Executive Officer, effective immediately. All in favor. Hands rose, hesitant, then resolute. The count crossed majority. Jonathan's eyes darted, desperate to will numbers back in his favor. Arithmetic cared nothing for pride. Motion carried, declared the chairman. You are relieved of all authority. Security entered. Jonathan erupted. Parasites. You think Mercer survives without me? His voice echoed in glass but found no ground. The guards took him by the arms. He struggled, then stilled rage collapsing into disbelief. The doors opened, and for the first time Jonathan Mercer was escorted out of the empire he had ruled. The board exhaled as though poison had been vented. Papers shuffled, voices resumed, plans formed, and slowly, inevitably, eyes turned toward me. I walked forward, stopping at the chair Jonathan once guarded. My hand rested on the leather before I lowered myself into it. The seat was cold, its weight unfamiliar, yet it did not feel like conquest. I did not smile. Triumph was too shallow a word. My father's letter echoed inside me. Keep the record straight. Jonathan's empire had collapsed, not with fire, but with silent signatures and truth laid bare. And in that silence, I understood this was not only survival, it was legacy reclaimed. They thought victory meant noise. I learned it breathes best in silence. The apartment greeted me with its old, ordinary light, the kind that doesn't brag. The freeze had lifted by noon. A clerk had called, then apologized without saying the word. Accounts thawed. The car reappeared like a stray humbled by weather. Boxes I had packed during the storm remained by the door, their tape puckered in little frowns. I didn't open them. I walked the rooms instead, touching the backs of chairs, the spine of a book, the window latch that always stuck. Silence filled the picture frames where arguments used to live. Even the clock ticked like it had learned discretion. On the table lay my notebook and the notarized copy of my father's signature, unaltered ink, steady as a pulse. I slipped it into a clear sleeve and slid the sleeve into my coat pocket. I wanted it near when I went to see him. Rachel arrived with paper bags and a grin half-built. I brought groceries, she said. Also salt, because superstition is a protocol. We ate standing the way people do when furniture still remembers the last argument. How does it feel? She asked. Less like drowning, I said. More like air I can afford. She raised a glass of tap water and improvised a ceremony. To silence, they never knew it could roar. We clinked the rim to the counter, a ritual without audience, and let the quiet answer for us. Later, I drove to the cemetery at the edge of town where the oaks lean like old friends. The afternoon kept its distance. Leaves fretted under a small wind. My father's name waited in stone that refused flourish. I knelt and placed the copy of his signature at the base, inside a simple frame I'd carried wrapped in brown paper. The glass caught a brief sun and let it go. I kept the record straight, I told him. Justice delayed is not justice denied, remember. The phrase felt less like an echo now and more like a hinge closing. Footsteps in the gravel. Stephen stopped a few yards away as if permission were a fence he could not climb. His suit looked slept in. His eyes looked honest for the first time in months. I was weak, but I chose late instead of never, he said. A dozen answers offered themselves, anger, inventory, arithmetic. I picked the only one that would not rot. Late still matters. His shoulders loosened. He glanced at the frame, at the stubborn ink that had outlived 100 lies. I'll testify again if they need me, he said, without hedging. Good, I said. We stood with the stone between us and found unexpectedly that it felt like a bridge. Diana met me back at the building, a file tucked under her arm and pride hidden like a safety pin. Repapering is underway, she said. The board will cooperate now that oxygen has returned. You were steady in there. I had a map, I said, touching my pocket. She nodded, satisfied, then softened. Rest. The momentum's ours, but courts still prefer patience. That night, I unrolled the spare quilt, left the boxes taped, and sat by the window to listen to a city that had stopped treating me like a rumor. The quiet did not demand anything from me. It simply kept its promise. For once, I let the evening finish a sentence without interruption. I chose to remain. Morning brought an envelope slid under the door, crisp as a new page. I turned it over in my hands. No return address, only the courthouse seal pressed clean into the flap. Inside, a single sheet with a single line, formal as a drumbeat. Judge Briggs requests me final testimony before sentencing. They once buried me in silence. I rose, and silence became my verdict. Winter sun glazed the courthouse steps in a hard, bright light that made every exhale look like smoke. Reporters swarmed the marble like gulls' cables snaking under boots. Microphones bloomed on poles, red tally lights blinking awake. Beyond the rope line, onlookers crowded together for warmth and spectacle. I stood where the stone met the first riser, the city breathing cold around us, Rachel a few feet back, Diana at my shoulder, Stephen watching from the fringe as if proximity might make guilt behave. Patricia waited apart, coat-cinched eyes brittle with hours that had taken more than sleep. The doors swung, and Judge Briggs stepped to the portable lectern robe banded with light. The murmurs thinned to a thread. He didn't look at me or Jonathan. He looked at the seal above the doors as if judgment should listen too. "This court has reached its conclusions," he said, voice carrying with no help from the speakers. "Jonathan Mercer is convicted on all counts presented to the jury: fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to defraud. Sentencing will follow per schedule. Further, this court orders restitution permanent injunction against his interference in Mercer Holdings and referral of ancillary matters to federal authorities." Pens scratched like sleet, then stilled. The marshal's van idled at the curb. Jonathan stood to one side, wrists cuffed, coat unbuttoned, face pale with a rage that had run out of stage. For years he had owned the angle. Today the camera found him without asking. A reporter called my name first, then 10 more. "Ms. Mercer, do you wish to comment?" Microphones tilted the crowd, leaning as one body. I could have spoken about numbers and scars, about the way lies borrow voices and signatures until the truth remembers itself. I could have thanked process and patience, named the hands that steadied me when the floor tilted. I did none of that. I raised the frame I had carried under my coat, the clean copy of my father's restored signature, unaltered ink that had outlived 100 performances. The glass caught the winter sun and threw it back, and I let the light do what language could not. "This speaks for me," I said. Something passed through the crowd, a hush with edges. Tally lights held, then froze. Cameras quit panning and simply looked. Even the wind seemed to kneel. Silence, the old weapon that once buried me, stood at my side like a sworn witness. Across the line, Patricia put a hand to her mouth and lowered it slowly, as if returning a fragile thing to the table without breaking it. Stephen's shoulders dropped, a breath unfastened. Diana didn't smile. She didn't need to. Rachel's eyes shone the way code does when it compiles clean on the first run. A marshal touched Jonathan's elbow. He jerked free, turned toward the steps, toward me. "Lies." He shouted the word raw enough to scratch. "Doctored files. She framed me. She—" His voice broke against stone. The guards took him by both arms. He twisted chin high for the cameras that had finally stopped obeying him. "You can't erase me," he roared as they steered him down past the microphones that did not tilt anymore. The van door slammed. The engine swallowed what was left. Silence returned to the steps and did not apologize. It was not absence now. It was a shape the day recognized. Reporters lowered their booms. No shouted follow-up could top an image. The frame cooled in my hands. I thought of the library's pale ladder of moonlight, of ledgers that remembered pressure, of a cabinet whose keyhole had learned my name. I thought of a letter that had crossed time so I could learn how to cross a room without bowing. I turned the frame slightly and the sun found it again. In their silence, I heard my father's approval. In mine, I left a legacy. When you look at my story, I hope you see more than a courtroom, more than forged signatures or bitter siblings. What I carried was silence once used to erase me, later turned into my loudest declaration. If my journey moved you, I invite you to stand with me now, not as spectators, but as witnesses who affirm that dignity matters more than noise. Your comments and reflections are more than words. They are proof that my father's lesson did not fade. Let me know if you saw strength where others tried to show weakness, or if you recognized the moment where silence became power instead of punishment. Support me by sharing your thoughts, because every response carries the weight of acknowledgement that my family once denied me. And beyond my own struggle, I urge you to apply this to your life. If ever someone tries to bury you in silence, remember that silence can become your shield, your sword, and your verdict. You don't have to outshout those who belittle you. You only have to hold steady, keep your truth intact, and let the right moment speak for itself. Patience is not weakness, it is preparation for legacy.